Hi, I'm Mike, one half of KETOlicious Kitchens. It's Friday, the day before a long holiday weekend. I've got Friday off. Lupita has to work. Well, sorry, but I'm going to soothe her pain by making dinner, and it's going to be one of her favorites. It's going to be a Parmesan crusted ribeye. Mouth-watering. We're going to learn three things in this video. One is a little bit about ribeye, things to be aware of, a little bit about compound butter. That's how we're going to make this delectable Parmesan crust. And finally, a few tips about grilling in general and how to cook this ribeye. So let's stop gabbing and let's start grilling. Okay, Parmesan crusted ribeye. The first thing is to note 1,100 calories of fat and protein packed perfection without a single carb. Delicious. So in this video, there's really only two things you need to know. One, you need to know the steak, and number two, you need to know your grill. If you've got those two things under control, you're gonna have a fantastic dinner. So let's start by talking about the steak, specifically ribeye, which is what we're making today. So one of the first things to know is basically the grades for steak, and the three main USDA grades for steak are Prime, Choice, and Select. Remember it by PCS, Prime, Choice, and Select. Prime is the most expensive, but it always has the most marbling and usually the best flavor, and that's what you're going to find in a nice steakhouse most of the time is going to be prime grade. Choice is usually what you see in the grocery store. It's more common, it's less marbling. It doesn't mean it's not good, but it doesn't have the same marbling that a piece of prime does. Then finally there's Select. That's going to be the least expensive. It's also going to have the least marbling and probably the least flavor. Dollar for dollar, I would go with Choice. It's the easiest to find for sure. The two cuts that we're looking at are Choice ribeyes, about 1 pound and 3 ounces or so a piece. And if you prepare them the way I'm going to describe here, you're going to be super pleased with them, and you'll never regret not purchasing a prime cut. And you'll save some money. Okay, USDA grades aside, the two things that you want to look at first, one is color. You want it to be cherry red. Don't get gray or some brown looking piece of meat. Get a nice bright cherry red cut. The next thing, and most importantly with ribeye, is look for the marbling. The marbling is the little white striations that are in the meat. That is where all the flavor is. It's like cow butter that's going to melt into the meat and make it taste delicious. And that's why people like ribeye, is for the flavor, and the flavor comes from the fat. So these two ribeyes have a fair amount of marbling in them, so they should be pretty good. So that little moon-shaped piece that's on the end of the ribeye that I'm tapping with my thumb and then pointing at on the other steak, that is called the cap. That is the most delicious, delectable piece of meat known to man. And if you can just get ribeye caps, that's going to be super expensive, but it's going to be super delicious because there is a lot of marbling in there and it is super tender. Okay, so now that we've selected our ribeye, the next step is to start preparing it, and we start with brushing olive oil on the meat, and this is going to help prevent the meat from sticking to the grill, and it's also going to help the seasoning stick to the meat. Okay, so after you've oiled the meat, we're going to salt and pepper or season it with whatever your favorite seasoning is. We like Chicago seasoning, so that's salt and garlic and a number of other peppers involved. But the key thing to do is to salt it, okay? That is going to give the flavor of the meat so much pop, okay? And so don't be afraid to be generous with the salt, because it's not a cracker, it's a thick piece of meat, so it's going to take a lot of salt to season through the thickness of the meat. Also, you want to do this about an hour, at least an hour, before you start grilling, so that you can allow that salt to dissolve into the meat. There's going to be this exchange of water between the meat and the salt going in and so forth, and you want to give time for that to happen. Okay, the steaks are oiled, seasoned. We're gonna let them set, let the meat warm up a little bit so it's not too cold in the center, and let's start making compound butter. So compound butter basically is a flavored butter with a combination of different savory herbs usually. This one is going to have cheese and parsley and garlic. We're going to mash it all together with the softened butter, not melted butter, but softened butter, and then set it in the fridge to set it up like cookie dough, and then slice it and put it on top of the steak. So after you've mixed it up really well, what you're going to do is scoop that onto a piece of plastic wrap, then we'll roll it up into a log and set it in the fridge to set up like cookie dough, like I mentioned earlier. Perfect. Let's pop it in the fridge, and now let's talk about the grill. So while we've got the steak sitting in the kitchen, kind of coming up to temperature, letting that salt kind of soak into the meat, and then also we've got the compound butter in the fridge setting up so that we can slice it and put it onto the steak. Let's talk about the grill a little bit. My simplest advice for you is to do this. Practice, okay? You're going to see a lot of videos and a lot of websites that say cook the steak for 2 minutes on this side, 2 minutes on that side, whatever it is. But really, you've got to know what the temperature is, what the BTU output is of your grill, okay? Some grills are naturally hotter than others, and what you want to be able to do is kind of look at the meats and also just know from experience with your grill how much time that generally is going to take. It just comes from practice, and so don't be afraid to try. Just do it, and you're going to learn. And my only advice would be this. Start on the rare side. If you're going to check the meats when it's rare, not when it's black, because it's too late then. And so there's a wide variety of opinions on this as far as the grill itself and oiling the grates versus oiling the meats and so on and so forth. I would say this: make sure the grate is clean. People that say, oh, it adds to the flavor of the meat to leave the crumblies on top. Personally, I don't want to taste what I cooked 3 weeks ago in what I'm cooking today. So I clean the grate. I don't oil the grate though. I oil the meat, as you saw earlier. And I've done it both ways, and I don't think there's any difference in my mind. I cannot tell the difference, and I think in terms of flavor, I can't tell the difference. I think in terms of the meat not sticking to the grill, it works better if I oil the meat. But that's just me. Okay, so before you start to put the meat on the grill, of course you want to turn on the grill, and you want to get the grill hot, and that doesn't mean leaving the lid open and getting the grates hot. What this means is turning the grill on, firing it up, closing the lid, and getting it hot, because what you're trying to do with the grill is sear it and also bake it. You're not using the flame to cook the meats, you're using the flame to kind of sear and crust the outside and use just the internal heat of the grill to cook the meat. That's how you're going to be able to get the interior cooked the way you want it without just completely blackening the outside of it. So close the lid, and you're going to cook it with the lid closed. This isn't hamburgers. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about those sweet little ribeyes that are going to go on the grill. The way that we're going to measure how the meat is doing, or at least how I measure how the meat is doing, is I look at the rendering of the fat. So that's the melting of the fat under the heat. That gives me a good indicator of what's going on with the meat, not just on the outside, but also on the inside, because the amount of rendering that's going on, the amount of flame that might be going on underneath the meat, is going to tell me where the meat is. It's super important to pay attention to that when we're doing a crusted, Parmesan crusted ribeye, because what we've got to do is we got to grill it here, and then we've got to put it under a broiler with that Parmesan to crust the Parmesan. So we don't want to get it perfect off the grill and then overcook it inside the broiler. So we've got to cook this just under whatever your preference is, because it's going to cook a little bit more under the broiler. And then it's also going to cook a little bit more even after you take it out and you let it rest for a little bit, right? So on the grill, we're going to aim to be underneath what our regular acceptable target is for the meat, because it's going to cook some more on a broiler. Okay, so the grill is super hot, 400 degrees, the grates are hot. I'm going to set the meat on there. It's going to put the first set of sear marks on there. After about 40 seconds, I'm going to lift it up and move it over a bit, set it back down 90 degrees from where it was. That's going to create the checkerboard sear mark pattern that's so super cute. So I'm aiming for medium rare, so in about 2 minutes, that's all it's going to take for these cuts to be ready to flip. And since the meat's already room temperature, it's not taking long for heat to get into the meat and to start rendering the fat. I'm seeing a lot of flame, so that tells me that the internal temperature of the meat is already getting about where I want it. So based on the flame I was already seeing, I know that it's only going to be a couple more minutes, basically the time it takes to sear the meat before it's time to just turn off the grill and pull the meat off. Looks like I should have trimmed that little tail, but other than that, these look awesome. Okay, so next step is to bring the meat in, pull the compound butter out of the fridge, and start slicing it into wheels and laying it across the meat. And so this is where the magic happens. Basically, that butter is going to melt into the meat, and the cheese is going to be left on top, and it's going to get golden brown and crispy, kind of salty, and it's just going to be so awesome. So get it right under that broiler so you can cook it fast without overcooking the meat. Check every once in a while, and it looks like we're ready. I can already taste this. The crispy, salty cheese with the butter and garlic melting into the meats and the fats and the tender protein. It is wonderful. So just give it 5 minutes to set, and then let's start eating. Okay, for me, the salad's a decoration. All I want is this meat.
All right, so this is perfect doneness.
Yum.
Medium.
Perfecto.
Perfect.
And this is perfect. Thank you. Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.
Okay, when it's not Lupita, this is what's in my dreams. Let's just enjoy. Okay, we hope you loved this Parmesan crusted ribeye as much as we do.
Si le gustó este video que a nosotros nos encantó, apóyenos y haga clic y like y suscríbase. Saludos.
Like, share, and subscribe. See ya.
Cheers. Bye.